Sairam, dear learners. In today's class, we'll be learning about growth of industry in India. This is the third subtopic in your textbook, that is first chapter. So here the word industry is used. In English, it might mean as a singular term, but when they refer to industry in this subtopic, they are referring to all industries, all types of industries. So we will learn about the growth of industrial sector since independence over the years. Very brief look at this sector. Now, industrial activity is classified under secondary sector. Secondary sector, just to refresh your memory, in any economy, I told you that there is a primary sector, there is a secondary sector, and there is tertiary sector. In primary sector, we actually classified all raw materials such as agricultural products or related products such as cow rearing or sheep or goats, poultry. All these are belonging to primary sector. From here, one would get raw material. For example, I told you that tomatoes are taken from primary sector and sent to secondary sector for processing. Processing means making sure that the raw materials are long lasting and they can be used for different purposes. So therefore, processing, what do processing mean in industries? They add different kinds of preservatives or they use different techniques to change the form of raw material and make it long lasting. Tomatoes are changed, its forms are changed into a semi-liquid and added preservatives, and ketchup is produced or manufactured so that it lasts for a long time. So that is one example. Another example is cotton. Now, if cotton is left by itself, it's of no use. Using different techniques, they change it into threads, and therefore you look around your house or room where you live in, there are a number of clothes, including bed sheets, shirts, pants. There are a number of clothes which are all derived from this, probably cotton into cotton threads, and this becomes a clothing. So that happens in secondary sector. So secondary sector consists of all industrial activities. So this is what you should know about secondary sector, means industrial activity or manufacturing activities. Okay, in industries, goods are produced, isn't it? So a cotton becomes a cotton thread, and from there a cotton textile. Cotton textile is a good. Tomato ketchup is a good, isn't it? So at the same time, goods can also be classified into two different types based on their usage. Now, how these goods are used, based on that, you can classify into two categories. One is consumer goods, another is capital goods. We look at what each of them means, but you already learnt about capital goods, if I am not wrong, in the previous video. So consumer goods, as you can see in the picture in the background, you will see that all these goods are present in supermarket, and as a consumer you would go and you take a cart and probably one by one use a muesli or a cereal which is present here, and there are certain beverages which are present on these racks. These are all purchased and used for final consumption. So consumer good is actually bought and used for final consumption. Example is clothing, food, jewelry, vehicles, books. Most of these goods are actually used by households, individuals or people living in houses, as together as a family, which is also called in economics household. So all these products are used for final consumption. Not only household, it is used even in organizations also. So for such as vehicles, for example, used to transport people from one place to another, etc. So they're all classified under consumer goods. Now the second type is called capital goods. These are some of the pictures that you might have seen in your previous class. What comes to your mind when you see all this? What is the commonality? These are all used to produce something else. They are used not as a final product. They are used for something else. For agricultural activity, there are tools for various manufacturing activity. They are all used for something else. So this is used for production of other goods and services. So this is called capital goods. Machinery, tools, buildings. Now this becomes very important in any economy. Why are we discussing consumer goods and capital goods? Any economy should have its own share, its own stock, its own assets of all these capital goods. Say there is a 50 acre of land and a farmer doesn't have a tractor or a large tiller. Do you think he can use that 50 acres of land just by using human labor? It would be very, very cumbersome. It would be very difficult, isn't it? So if you don't have a stitching machine, imagine how long it would take to stitch a shirt or a pant. So actually having these goods, producing these goods is actually very important even before consumer goods. Do you understand? So why growth in industries is that important? Why is it important? We have learned that industries has many uses. First of all, it reduces burden on agriculture. It reduces burden means in one way, actually it helps agriculture. As I told you, by manufacturing tractors, it helps agriculture. That way it reduces burden. It supports agriculture. Second way, what it does, it gives employment to people who are depending only on agriculture. It gives employment. You look around many villages, many women are actually these days going and working in textile industries. 20 years back, 30 years back in India, actually they didn't have these many factories. But now they have other share of employment. Now there is a banking sector which will actually support agriculture sector. So banking comes under actually services sector. But say for example fertilizer industry, which is part of secondary sector, also supports agriculture. It reduces burden not only by providing services but also gives employment to people. So it gives income, higher incomes to people. So therefore less number of people, actually depend on agriculture and they can earn more incomes. So that is first use. Second is enable growth of production of consumer goods. So industries produce many kinds of capital goods and consumer goods which are essential for day-to-day consumers like me. Our quality of life has become so much better, isn't it? We are all using laptops and mobiles. So these are all consumer goods. How good our quality of life has become. So that is second. And what about third? Enable growth in small industries that are helpful for employment generation. As I already told you, it reduces burden on agriculture by giving employment in small scale industries. What are small industries? Agarbatti industry is one example for small industry. So these are all small industries are nothing but which occupies less area and they require less capital, less equipments, through which they can produce some valuable goods and commodities. So this is the third. What is the fourth important usage? That is reduce dependence on foreign countries and improve dependence on ourselves. That is called self-reliance. So self-reliance means depending on our own ability. So as I told you in the last class, we used to depend on foreign countries for importing wheat. when we got independence, we imported wheat from USA. So more and more tractors, more and more fertilizers, more and more better seeds and technology, Indian farmer, wheat farmer was able to produce more wheat. That is how we became self-reliant. Self-reliant means depending on our own ability. So why growth in industries is important? So these are some of the points which will help you to understand why it is important. So therefore we got independence, and now we had to decide how should we plan for our industrial growth. We had to plan for our industries, isn't it? Because industries plays very important role in development of economy in the long run. Long run means for a long period of time. So in a short period of time, an economy can grow in agriculture, etc. But that is only short-lived. Population is increasing. More and more people are being born, and you have to find them employment, you have to give them food, you have to give them clothing. If you don't have industries in the long run, what are you going to do? So that becomes a good question mark, isn't it? So therefore, industrial growth becomes important in the long run as economy develops. So we came up with a plan that is called blueprint. So what was the plan in the year 1956? Our economists or statisticians came up with a plan which was adopted, which was agreed, which was decided by the then politicians, which was actually named as Industrial Policy Resolution in the year 1956. So before that, let us briefly discuss about this person called P.C. Mahalanobis or Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobis, and I hope you have learnt about him briefly in the previous class. He was actually called Architect of Indian Planning. Why? In the year 1956, actually he came up with the plan for industrialization of India. It was adopted in the second 5-year plan. It was called Mahalanobis model. Model means something which you can take as an example and implement in other areas. So he came up with the model. Now this is actually not part of your syllabus, but because industrial policy is of especially 1956 is mentioned, and it is so important from Indian industrialization point of view, I am telling you very briefly. So what was the plan? So this was the model about. So he actually came up with the idea, see, to achieve faster growth rate, if an economy has to grow fast, consumption has to be encouraged. Do you agree or not? Today all of us are buying mobile phones more and more in rural areas, in towns, even a student or a chaiwala. Everybody has some kind of a good mobile phone or the other. So consumption demand, more and more people are consuming, they are buying for usage. So because this demand is going up, production of mobile phones also go up, isn't it? So when consumption increases, the production also increases and the quality of goods increases over a period of time. So quality of consumption goods, consumer goods increases. When this happens, there is faster growth rate because more and more industries start producing these goods. So to produce mobile phones, because there is more and more demand for mobile phones, they'll come up with better technologies. They produce capital goods. We discussed that capital goods are machinery, tools, equipments, etc. Isn't it? So these are all capital goods. When a machinery which can produce better mobile phones, better touch screen, better camera, the mobiles become better and better. So therefore, very simply, what was the idea? That if economy has to grow, growth rate has to be encouraged. More and more growth rate means more and more consumption. So if there is more consumption, there is more growth rate. For more consumption to happen, capital goods have to be produced. That is tools, machinery and equipments. To produce these capital goods, you saw that there were big equipments. To produce them, you need what are called heavy industries. Heavy industries are those industries which require huge capital. They require large area, large plants and machineries, large buildings, etc. to basically manufacture these capital goods. So therefore I told you that industrial policy resolution in 1956 was adopted. Then what was it? Basically to establish more and more heavy industries. What does a resolution mean? Resolution means official decision where members of parliament have voted for. Means they have all agreed that this will be the policy that India will adopt going forward. So India will establish first priorities for more and more heavy industries. What are the examples for heavy industries? We will come into it. Heavy industries are started by public sector. Public sector means government sector. That is government owned sector. So government will become a owner of heavy industries. What do? Heavy industries manufacture large heavy articles, materials to produce other goods and services. Example for heavy industries is, you have all heard of Bharat Heavy Electronics Limited, that is BHEL. These are all public sectors. You can see the turbine here. So this is a big turbine used for oil rigging. This is a huge tool, huge equipment used for bringing out oil from the earth. Produced or manufactured by BHEL, that is Bharat Heavy Electronics Limited. So this is an example for capital good and this is an example for heavy industries. What are the other industries? BEL, that is Bharat Electronics. You have HMT. I don't know how many of you have heard of HMT. When during our childhood, HMT watches were very famous. And there are other tools also, tractors and bearings required for machineries that are manufactured by HMT. And there is ONGC. So ONGC is responsible for petroleum, diesel, etc. that you are buying. ONGC actually refines the crude oil. So these are all examples for heavy industries in India. Imagine if we don't have diesel and petroleum for our machineries, isn't it? So example for heavy machineries in India are some of these which were actually set up in the first and second 5-year plans. Remember, we discussed about 5-year plans. India actually started planning system after independence and we had 5-year plans. Every 5 years we decided that government spends money on certain sectors. Government basically established these industries that you see on your screen. Briefly, what is the history of industrial sector growth? So very brief look, we will not go very deep into it. So in 1950s and 260s you saw that government was engaged in industrial sector in establishing these heavy industries. Then in 60s what happened? The industrial growth rate actually reduced. In the 80s, investment in infrastructure such as power sector, electricity, etc., coal, rail, they again started increasing. In 60s it reduced because in India we suffered from 60s to 70 huge losses because of war with China, war with Pakistan. So India didn't have much money to spend on its economic growth, economic development. You will learn about it in go into higher classes. So in 60 to 70s till 80s we actually suffered in industrial sector, growth rate reduced. 80s again investment started increasing, where in infrastructure government started building more and more railway tracks and more rail engines, etc. Till 1990s again industry started reducing in its performance because of mismanagement. Over the period of time, industry's productivity or ability to produce started reducing because government took the in charge of industries, and people working in government sectors didn't have encouragement such as increase in salaries or promotions or bonuses, etc. Productivity started reducing, ability to produce more and more goods. So by the end of 1990s, actually growth rate in industries slowed down because of international competition. Because Indian industries were not able to produce good products. For example, I told you HMT. HMT watches, initially people started buying, but then from foreign countries, from USA, there were better watches. There were from Switzerland, there were better watches. So this became international competition, and Indian goods such as HMT were actually not in a high quality. Their quality was very poor. So they couldn't withstand foreign competition. And another reason is by the end of 1990s, industries growth rate started reducing because of rigid licensing system. You'll learn more about it as we go along, but for now you know that industries were required to take hundreds of permissions before any activity. Before they start another branch of an industry, they had to take hundreds of permissions. For example, we know Tata Industries and Reliance, these are all the industries that you see today. They actually struggled a lot going from office to one government office to another government office for licensing. They had to give a lot of bribes. So that industry, starting a small industry, became a big headache, big hassle. So because of government rules also, industries suffered. And there was not adequate infrastructure support. Economy was not growing. Remember, there were no good watches. We cannot sell it to others. Indians are also not buying. So therefore all our money is actually paid for either imports or spending on providing for poor people. Many reasons government didn't have money. So infrastructure building reduced. So infrastructure support was not there for industries. So therefore what happened in the year 1991? Government decided enough is enough. We have to encourage private sector. Government by itself will not be able to produce good products and lead industries. They encourage private sector, private companies. So therefore they came up with this model called liberalization, privatization and globalization. This is a very big topic. In your textbook, it is used just in one sentence or two sentences, but we need one more class to explain this. In today's class, the background that you have is good enough. We will learn about what is LPG model, why government actually changed their policies towards liberalization, privatization and globalization. We will learn about this in the next video. Sai Ram. Thank you.